Welcome to this video series on the Making International Law in Korea. We'll begin in this week of videos with a description and explanation of the core principles and practices of international law and discuss the primary sources of international law in Korea, such as human rights situation in North Korea, Korean Armistice Agreement, Article 3 of the Constitution of Korea, and state succession of unified Korea and Northern Limit Line. And finally, we'll see a special zone for peace and cooperation between South Korea and North Korea. Let me first touch upon the human rights situation in North Korea and from the perspective of international law. It is difficult to get accurate information regarding the human rights situation in North Korea since it is a closed society. There are various sources, however, that provide reports of human rights violations in North Korea. According to annual report of the Amnesty International in 2012, North Koreans continue to suffer violations covering nearly entire spectrum of their human rights. The biggest concern linked to North Korea's economic situation is the right to sustenance. North Koreans are exposed to the danger of death by famine due to the food shortage. Limited food is discriminatorily distributed according to social classes and regions. The right to adequate standard of living is also being infringed upon due to the shortage of water and sanitary facilities. Additionally, the collapse of North Korean medical system is causing a great predicament to the right of the North Koreans to health care. Individual freedom is seriously violated in all areas such as thought, conscience, religion, association, and expression. The North Korean government controls the flow of information and does not recognize free speech and expression. The nation infringes rights on political freedom and censors the people's thought by operating many political prison camps. In this camp, human rights violations such as torture and forced labor are being committed on a daily basis. Capital punishment, which is related to the right of life, is also being conducted and public execution is carried out as well. North Koreans do not have a right to residence and movements, and a private life is not protected. As to a personal liberty, the North Korean criminal procedure provides rules on arrest, imprisonment, and such as seizure, but there is no previous warrant system, and law and regulations are not generally observed. The most serious problem concerning a right to equality among North Korean human rights issues is a classification system of North Koreans and discrimination in accordance with it. The people could be classified into three political groups: a core class, a wavering class, and a hostile class, based on their origins and social status. The hostile class is poorly treated in every area of life, including employment, education, residence, and medical service. Cases of discrimination on the disabled prove to be also serious, where their right to residence is restricted, and in particular, a dwarf goes through the forced vasectomy and are separated from public. There are many other human rights issues, such as severe punishment toward defectors, and North Korean and Japanese abductees. There are also cases wherein South Korean prisoners of war were not safely returned to South Korea. Currently, North Korea is a state party to several important international human rights treaties, including International Covenant on Economic, Social, Cultural Rights, International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, Convention on the Rights of the Child, and Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It is needless to say that a system to implement these treaties will be an important means under international law to improve human rights, the system, and human rights situation in North Korea. For example, North Korea to submit a report required by each treaty to confirm the reporting system of these treaties. North Korea once informed the UN Secretary General of its withdrawal from the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights on August 27, 1997. However, the nation went against its own withdrawal by submitting regular reports of the ICCPR in March 2000. This reporting system can have an effect on indirectly pressing the North Korea regarding its observance of human rights treaties. However, North Korea did not accept the state-to-state complaint of ICCPR, which mentioned in Article 4, and is not a party to the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights that prescribe as the system of individual complaint of this ICCPR. Furthermore, North Korea is not a state party to court treaties for protection of human rights, including International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, in short term CEDAW, and Second Optional Protocol to ICCPR, aiming at the abolition of the death penalty, and Optional Protocol to CEDAW, and also Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, and Degrading Treatment or the Punishment, in short term CAT, Optional Protocol to CAT, and Optional Protocol to CRC on the involvement of children in armed conflict, and Optional Protocol to CRC on the sales of children and child prostitution and child pornography, and Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and Optional Protocol to CRPD, and International Convention for Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. This is a major factor limiting the improvement of North Korean human rights through international human rights treaties. Since North Korea is a member state of the United Nations, as mechanisms for human rights protection can be useful means to improve North Korean human rights situation. The UN Commission on Human Rights, the UNCHR, the subsidiary body of UN Economic and Social Council, which substituted the Human Rights Council, has been passing a resolution every year on North Korean human rights since 2003, when it first adopted a resolution on it. Also, the UNCHR passed a resolution in March 2012 with the title, The Human Rights Situation in the Democratic People's Republic Korea, which contains determination, urging, and request. In addition, it appointed the Bitit Muntabon as a special rapporteur on the situation of the North Korean human rights. He submitted a report twice to the UNCHR, which functioned as a basis for the resolution on North Korean human rights in General Assembly of the United Nations. A national report system for the universal periodic review of the United Human Rights Council can certainly contribute to the improvement of the human rights situation of North Korea. By submitting a report on human rights, North Korea may put effort into improving its human rights conditions. Also, through the mechanism of the universal periodic review, other countries can raise questions on human rights situation in North Korea, which can indirectly lead to North Korean effort in improving human rights conditions. Since year 2005, the UN General Assembly has brought up an agenda on North Korean human rights issues and adopted a resolution by voting. The resolution adopted most recently expressed serious concern at the persistence of continuing reports of systematic and widespread and grave violation of civil, political, economic, and social cultural rights in the Democratic People's Republic Korea, and passed a resolution urging an immediate end of human rights violation, protecting of its people and punishment of the people in charge of the human rights violation, and implementation of the human rights related with the recommendation by the United Nations in cooperation with the international community for the human rights improvement and consideration for joining conventions relating to human rights. These resolutions reflect the international community's interests and concerns toward the North Korean human rights condition and can amount to pressure toward North Korean authorities. North Korea, however, is responding with criticism to resolutions related to North Korean human rights passed by the Human Rights Council or UN General Assembly. The state remains uncooperative in activities of the Special Rapporteur or Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ironically, North Korea is a signatory state of 5 major international human rights treaties: the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, and International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and Convention on the Rights of Child, and Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. However, the signing of treaties remain as a mere ritual without sincere motivations or concrete actions. The implementation of the 5 treaties in North Korea is still open to question. So far, the result of tangible domestic practices has been vague. Furthermore, while North Korea has adopted and amended a number of domestic legislation consistent with the ratified human rights conventions, especially in the area of the criminal law, criminal procedure, and gender equality, it would appear to be a paper rather than in practice. For over 10 years, the United Nations General Assembly and Human Rights Council have adopted resolutions aiming at addressing North Korea's gross human rights violations. The UN Special Rapporteur appointed to examine the situation of human rights in North Korea have also called for the international community to pay the greater attention to the worsening human rights conditions in this region. Despite efforts made by the international community, the North Korean regime have been refusing to comply with the UN human rights mechanisms. It is argued that the North Korean case is one of the few that remains as an affront to the accountability norm. However, with the exception of the North Korea, holding state accountable and punishing individuals responsible for massive human rights violations have become the rule in the international community with the development of international criminal law. In this respect, it is noteworthy that there has been dramatic progress since the Commission of the Inquiry was established by the Human Rights Council based on the recent resolution adopted in March 2013. The Commission intensively investigates the situation in the region with a view to ensuring full accountability, in particular for violations that may amount to crimes against humanity. The COI, the Commission of Inquiry, completed its mandate by presenting a 400 pages final report to the HRC in March 2014. The Commission confirmed that most of human rights violations committed in North Korea and those that continue to take place in there amount to crimes against humanity and recommend the international community to address the human rights situation in North Korea by taking actions based on the principle of responsibility to protect, including Security Council's referral to the case to the International Criminal Court or the establishment of an ad hoc International Criminal Tribunal. In the same vein, the South Korea adopted North Korean Human Rights Act on March 3, 2016, and enforced the September 4, at the same year. The act intends to protect and promote the full enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms of the North Koreans by laying the institutional foundation to draw up and carry out consistent and systematic North Korean human rights policies. Overall, the purpose of this act is to contribute to the protection and improvement of human rights of the North Koreans by pursuing the right to liberty and right to life prescribed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international conventions on human rights as stipulated in Article 1 of the Act. In addition to effort to protect and promote the human rights of North Koreans, this Act highlights that the state shall also endeavor to improve North and South relations and to establish peace on the Korean Peninsula. At the same time, the government shall promote inter-Korean human rights dialogue on important matters for the improvement of the human rights in North Korea based on Article 7. In order to provide the advice on policies related to improvement of the human rights in North Korea, there is hereby the established a North Korean Human Rights Advisory Committee in the Ministry of Unification. In providing North Korean authorities and agencies with any humanitarian assistance for North Koreans to promote human rights in North Korea, the state shall endeavor to ensure that the following matters are complied with. Firstly, assistance shall be delivered transparently under internationally recognized delivery standard. And secondly, assistance shall be provided preferentially for vulnerable social groups, such as pregnant women and infants. Furthermore, to investigate actual status of the human rights in North Korea and to engage in research, policy developments, etc., relate to the improvement of human rights in North Korea, including inter-Korean dialogue on human rights and humanitarian assistance, the government shall establish a North Korean Human Rights Foundation based on this act. It is, however, has not been set up until today. Lastly, to collect and record the information on the status of the North Korean human rights and the information for the improvement of the human rights in North Korea. There is hereby a Center for North Korean Human Rights Record in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs based on Article 13.